Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be going over a practical test to see how good mercenaries are in Conflict of Nations World War III. In order to do this, I'm going to be creating a map where I only use mercenaries to attack a player early game to see how well the mercenaries fare against the other player's early game motorized infantry. Now, this obviously is not an actual strategy and not something you should be doing in-game, but it will give us a good idea on how good mercenaries are when they are put in direct combat against motorized infantry. I'm going to be doing this by building a ton of mercenary outposts in my provinces to build the mercenaries and a bunch of recruiting offices. Before we get into the actual practical test, let's see how good they are in theory. Mercenaries have a soft attack damage of 4.5 and a hard attack damage of 1, which is slightly higher than the motorized infantry soft attack damage of 3, but it's lower than the hard attack damage of 2. So when I saw this, I was thinking, maybe mercenaries are very good to supplement your infantry early game due to their higher soft attack damage, but then something you need to phase out late game. In order to answer that question, see if I was right, I'm performing this test. So it took about 5 days in-game at the 4x speed level, which is about 1 day in my real life, in order for me to get 2 effective stacks of these mercenary units. And this is a little bit of a high amount of time, but we'll discuss that later. From here, I'm going to be attacking South Africa, who's been making advances, therefore I know that they're an active player, and will do my best to find some of their units. Obviously, this is not going to be a real invasion with any goal other than to get my units fighting somebody else's units as soon as possible. Again, I'm not really trying to win, I'm just going to be testing their combat effectiveness. So one thing that's important to note is the 4-on-4, which was 4 in each stack plus 1 motorized infantry, was the maximum amount of mercenaries I was able to build in 5 in-game days, because I had my entire economy geared towards making them, and that's all I was able to get. Now from here, I was able to completely take out South Africa. I wiped all of his cities. Again, I didn't really take the provinces around it because it wasn't a real invasion. I wiped out all of his units because he didn't really have units, I found, since he had already invaded Namibia, meaning from here I'm going to attack Mozambique because this guy's definitely active and definitely has a lot of units looking at his development, and we're going to see, I'm going to land at a few of his cities, including his capital, and see if I can hopefully hit a unit or two and see how that goes. Almost immediately as I sent my 2 stacks in, both of them were wiped out. One of them by a relatively weak, almost all level 1 tank stack, and another one in his homeland city by a couple units and a fighter jet. Now, the main thing that I want to note from this is the fact that these mercenary bands were stacks of 5 and were defeated by other stacks, which were neither of the 2 stacks that defeated them were larger. They just had better troops that dealt more damage. And on top of that, he was able to build even more troops that were then able to attack me from the north, invading my country. Now, this is going to be very important to know, and I have a few reasons that I want to discuss as to why this happened. So this is my in-game just a couple days after my units were absolutely wiped because I was focusing on mercenary bands, and from here, I just want to go over a few reasons why the mercenaries weren't as effective as a supplement as I thought they were going to be. The first one being resource production. Now, I don't really have any good cities to model this off of, but actually, in order to build the mercenaries, you have to come over here. It takes 1.3 thousand manpower and 3,000 money dollars. I'm just going to call them dollars. It's not the currency used in the game. It's called money, but just for the purposes of discussion. It took not only all of my manpower, which meant in order to actually build sufficient amounts of them, I had to only build the recruiting offices, not the actual arms industries in my cities. But even if I wanted to build something else, since you're pushing mercenaries, you run out of money, and that prevents you from doing anything. Like, you can run out of supplies, you can run out of components, but there are other aspects of the game that you can invest in. Run out of money, you physically cannot do anything. You can't research, you can't build, you can't upgrade your infrastructure, you can't mobilize more troops. So that, in and of itself, when I was developing just in order to build the stacks that I was going to test with, prevented my game from actually being able to do anything else significant. Other than that, the units themselves just weren't very strong compared to alternative investments early game. So I noted how you run out of your money, but even if I forget about that and I say that, sure, I'm just going to build these mercenaries, they use the other resources too that could have been going to things such as main battle tanks or armored fighting vehicles or even combat recon vehicles, which all supplementing the motorized infantry themselves are much more effective. It also, pushing these early game prevents you from being able to go into an effective navy, which also would have been a much more smart strategy if I wanted to invade Mozambique, because I could simply bombard his capital rather than fighting the troops that he had there. Now, these in and of themselves mean that A, you can't actually build anything else, and B, you're investing in a troop that isn't super strong. Now, a lot of people think, okay, you can build them in the provinces, so you have more opportunities to mobilize them. But when you run out of money, you don't have those opportunities to mobilize them because the money that you produce early game is, no, this is super low because all of my provinces were destroyed, but it's close to anywhere between 4,000 and 8,000 per day. And since it costs, what was it again, 3,000, that means you could build one mercenary per day. And that is like nothing. Like one troop per day is absolutely atrocious compared to the 2 to 3 to 4, maybe. Even if you had motorized infantries diversified with tanks, since they use different resources, you could probably build 6 units a day if you followed that strategy, which I recommended in my research and strategies video. You can go check that out if you're interested. But just the resource bottleneck on building these means that you're way behind in the resource and troop production. Overall, I wouldn't recommend mercenaries at all. So A, I wouldn't recommend you build them for troops. As my practical test demonstrated, the other troops, such as motorized infantries, tanks, recon vehicles, armored fighting vehicles, are all more effective early game while using diversified sets of resources that aren't required to build everything. And that's the reason that B, I'm not even going to recommend you use them as a supplementary troop. They put too much of a strain on manpower and money, the two resources you need to do almost anything else in the game to make them that worth it. They aren't strong enough and don't produce enough troops in that time to actually be worth completely tanking your research and production of almost anything else. Now, the one time this test doesn't exactly apply to is late game, because this simply looks at using them early game as a supplement to really base your army around, but when you're using them late game, I think they can have an exceptional amount of potential, especially when you're attacking a country abroad, because once you get to late game, money and manpower kind of become no object. So for example, say I'm in Angola, I've taken over the majority of Africa, and then I want to start a campaign in India. From there, I would need to then send all of my troops to India abroad in order to actually attack. But since these troops don't, like, production doesn't require annexing a city, you can simply take a province and then build a mercenary outpost there and build mercenaries pretty much instantaneously. What would be great, for example, is in this hypothetical success story, I would go and I would be taking, let's say the entire red sector would be, I'd be invading India. I would only need to take a city and a province, and boom, now I have troop production in India. So I think they have a lot of potential late game, but early game are definitely something you should stay away from, as long as manpower and money are actually important to keep in check. Other than that, thank you guys for watching this video. If you found it useful, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Feel free to use the comment section as a way to continue to debate and discuss this game, because I honestly think disclosure and discussions with other players are the best way to really root out what is good and what isn't in this game. But thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next